call the Community Development meeting to order on June 2nd. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any discussion? The agenda is approved. Is there a motion to approve?
Vote, Madam Chair.
I don't know why it was there.
I'm sorry, council
We had
member?
a motion and a second, but we didn't vote.
Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
We have adopted our agenda. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of May 21st, 2018?
Move approval of the May 21st minutes.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We've got minutes. Our first business item is 2018-139, establishing a public hearing date for the 2019 Public Housing Agency Plan. Jennifer Keogh.
Good afternoon, Chair, Council members. Again, for the record, my name is Jennifer Keogh, and I'm the manager of the Metro HRA. The proposed action before you today requests that the Metropolitan Council establish a date to conduct a public hearing to discuss and receive comment on the 2019 Public Housing Agency Plan. The hearing will take place on August 20th, 2018 at 4 p.m. here in the Council chambers. I'm going to spend just a few minutes this afternoon giving you an overview of the elements of the plan and sort of the formal process that we go through in the timeline to get to the approval of the plan this fall. So the Public Housing Agency Plan, or what we shorten up to as the PHA Plan, is a required document by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, for all agencies administering either a public housing program or a housing choice voucher program. The document really is meant to be a convenient source of information, and it forms HUD, program participants, and the general public of the HRA mission for serving the needs of low-income families and strategies for addressing those needs. There are two parts to the plan, as many of you may recall and have been through this presentation before. There's two parts. There's a 5-year plan and an annual plan. And that 5-year plan is due every 5th year. And it's an opportunity for us to provide HUD with our long-range goals for meeting the needs of the low-income persons in our region. You approved this in 2015, and it is good through 2019. And our annual plan is just as it states. We do that annually. And that annual plan is an opportunity for us to provide HUD our strategies for meeting housing needs in the coming year. And we also have an opportunity to communicate to HUD elements of the PHA plan that have been revised. The elements that generally are revised are done through what's called our Housing Choice Voucher Administrative Plan. And this is our main policy document. So this is what we call the nuts and bolts of the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's our main policy document, and it must be done in accordance to HUD regulations and requirements, and it then becomes a supporting document to that PHA plan. The administrative plan consists of all of our mandatory and discretionary policies. And some examples are on the screen. So we're looking at policies about how we select folks off of the waiting list, how we issue our vouchers, how we determine bedroom sizes for subsidies, termination, inspections. So all of those things, HUD is either going to tell us it's a must or a may, and those are our discretionary policies. We try to go through the administrative plan once a year very thoroughly and come to you annually with any changes that need to be made. Of course, HUD sometimes comes out with changes that need to be acted on right away, or there's policies that we need you to act on right away, and those come outside of that process. But generally speaking, we try to do this on an annual basis in conjunction with this PHA plan. The Resident Advisory Board is required by HUD, and it's to enable program participants, so the families that we serve, to advise the HRA in policy and plan development. We have found that it's been a great opportunity for us to engage with the families that we serve very authentically. The meetings are hosted by our outreach staff, and it really provides the families we serve an opportunity for them to provide feedback on proposed changes, to give us feedback on the work that we're doing in the HRA, and have the opportunity to ask us policy and procedural questions. We'll be hosting those throughout the community, so they don't come here. We go out in the community, and we'll be doing those throughout the month of July. So the timeline to get this done from spring to fall is as follows. We're starting to draft the changes to our plan. Today we're here to establish a public hearing date. We will then open for a 45-day public comment period. In July is when we're hosting our resident advisory board meetings and getting feedback from the families we serve. You'll see me back here in August for a public hearing, and then we will come back to you again in September and ask for your approval to any of the changes that we're making to the PHA and Housing Choice Voucher Administrative Plan. So the proposed action to review is that the Metropolitan Council establish a date to conduct a public hearing to discuss and receive comment on the 2019 Public Housing Agency Plan. And again, the hearing will take place on August 20th, 2018 at 4 p.m. here in the council chambers. And with that, I would take any questions that you may have.
Councilmember Dorfman.
One quick question. When is the proposed new plan due to HUD?
It is due October 15th.
And then and then they'll have some time to review it and approve it as well. And then it takes effect sometime mid-2019?
Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, what happens is it really takes effect the date that you all approve it.
Okay.
The administrative plan takes effect then, and then it would take effect. The PHA plan would take effect with the calendar year.
Any other questions? In that case, I have one, Jennifer. Is the draft that we're putting out for the hearing informed by the public input, or does that happen during the hearing process?
Ms. Chair, thank you for that question. What happens is when that public comment period opens up, it will be available for review, and we will take all of those comments that we receive. Generally speaking, the comments we receive are through that resident advisory board, as well as we always receive a fairly lengthy commentary, as you may have seen previously, from legal aid. And we review that very thoroughly and then take into consideration any of those changes. So that's how we do that public comment period, is during that 45 days. So we'll put out our draft of the changes that we've come up with, take public comments, and then come to you all in September with that melded opportunity for approval.
That's great. Two of the things, Jennifer, that we heard from the Equity Advisory Committee, first of all, that there's a huge problem with people having vouchers but not being able to find a landlord who will accept them. And we're also hearing that larger immigrant families are unable to find the 3- and 4-bedroom apartments that they need. So do with that what you will.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. As you know, we were here, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about the work that we're doing, not just with our mobility counseling program, but with our outreach staff. And so that work we really feel is, I think we placed over 40 families in a pretty short amount of time. So taking that concerted effort in working with families, doing the landlord outreach with the resources that we have, we're really trying to make a difference and working to find partners. As I look at Terry Smith, the director of the HRA, is looking to see where there's partners and opportunities that we can expand our reach further.
Excellent. Is there a motion to approve the August 20th public hearing date?
So moved.
Second? We've got a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
To approve the August 20th public hearing date. Helmo.
My Siri is too smart. She's looking for a public hearing date. Folks, our next business item is 2018-140, the City of Cottage Grove, Harkness Avenue Comprehensive Plan Amendment. Corrine Wendell, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. Corinne Wendell with the Local Planning Assistance under community development. And today's item is the Cottage Grove, City of Cottage Grove's Harkness Avenue Small Area Plan Comprehensive Plan Amendment. As you can see in Figure 1 of the staff report, Thrive MSP 2040 gives the City of Cottage Grove a community designation of suburban edge. And so you can see that area of the small area plan located in that red color towards the northwest area of Cottage Grove. And it's representing the location of that small area plan. And so as you can see in Figure 2 of your staff report, this map shows the regional system in relation to the amendment site. As seen on the map, the Red Rock Bus Rapid Transit, the BRT corridor, is located to the south of the amendment area, shown in that red dotted line. And the half-mile station area of the proposed 80th Street station is just shy of the southernmost portion of the amendment site. And so in the vicinity map here, you can see the aerial. So the Harkness Avenue Small Area Plan area is actually heavily wooded at about 90% and does include steep slopes within the entirety of the properties that are located there. And it's about 55 acres in size. And so within this amendment, the purpose of the amendment is to incorporate the Harkness Avenue Small Area Plan into their comprehensive plan. It does re-guide 55 acres of low density residential to medium density residential and high density residential in 21 acres and 34 acres respectively. And then with the concept development that they've proposed, there's a potential for 543 new residential units within the small area plan being incorporated into the comprehensive plan. And so here you can see the existing and the proposed land uses. So on the left of the screen shows the existing, which is your low density residential, and then to the right is that transformation to the high density to the west side, and then the medium residential, medium density residential to the east. And so within the amendment, we find that it does conform to the regional system plans. It is consistent with council policies except for the natural resources, and is compatible with plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. And then the proposed action that we request is to adopt the attached review record and allow the City of Cottage Grove to place the Harkness Avenue Small Area Plan, Comprehensive Plan Amendment into effect. Find that the amendment does not change the city's forecasts. Encourage the city to consider alternative methods of development and stormwater management to preserve as much of the existing natural resources in the amendment site as possible. And lastly, to advise the city to implement the advisory comments of the review record for transportation and housing. And so with that, I'll stand for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Corinne? Is there a motion to approve the Cottage Grove Comp Plan Amendment?
So moved.
Second?
We have a first and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Corinne, thank you so much. Our next item is 2018-141, the City of Oakdale Helmo Bus Rapid Transit Station Area Comprehensive Plan Amendment. Mike Larson, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Michael Larson, local planning assistant. City of Oakdale has submitted the Helmo Bus Rapid Transit Station Area Comprehensive Plan Amendment for our review, for council review rather. As shown in Figure 1 of your staff report, Thrive MSP 2040 gives the City of Oakdale a community designation of suburban. The area affected by the amendment is shown in red, adjacent to the interchange of I-94 and I-694. As shown in Figure 2 of your staff report, the map shows regional systems in relationship to the amendment site, which include the future alignment of the Metro Gold Line, BRT, which I was going to try to annotate here, but I'm not quite sure how to do that. Anyway, fortunately, we have provided a dash red line for your convenience. The Metro Gold Line will run along, 80% of it will run in a dedicated busway, primarily along the north side of I-94, along Hudson Boulevard, proceed north on Hadley, east on 4th Street, and then through the amendment area, and then over a new dedicated bridge for the transit line, south along Muhlenberg Drive to its terminal station at the Woodbury Theater parking lot. So as part of the amendment, the city is incorporating the Helmo BRT stationary plan into the comprehensive plan. It creates and applies a new general guiding land use of BRTOD, and it applies this to 44 acres in the station area. The small area plan provides more detailed land use guidance, as well as public infrastructure, designating areas for medium density residential at 15 to 24 units an acre, high density residential at 30 to 50 dwelling units an acre, as well as employment related uses that will be governed by floor area ratio minimums. Concurrent with the amendment is the requested forecast increase associated with the anticipated new higher level of development. And that request is 700 households and 1,700 population. And this is consistent with staff recommendations from the EAW that preceded this. As shown in figure 3 of your staff report, the existing planned land uses in the amendment area include business campus in the darkest color, office limited business in the pink color in the west of the map, as well as park and open space. As shown in figure 4, the general guiding land use is designated as bus rapid transit oriented development for the entirety of the planning area. As shown in figure 5 of your staff report, the stationary plan provides detail on likely new street connections and other public infrastructure, including the transit station and a public park, and identifies locations for new housing and employment uses. It states that, quote, all proposals for new development in the area must be in substantial compliance with the layout and principles of the BRT TOD plan and meet the standards of the design framework and plan unit development ordinance for the area. So staff findings are that the proposed amendment conforms to regional system plans. The plan reflects the current understanding of the likely alignment and location of the Metro Gold Line, including its station and park and ride at Helmo Avenue. As shown in the land use section of the review record, starting on page 4, we considered the proposed land uses against the land use policies in the transportation policy plan, including the density of residential development and the activity levels in the station area. The proposed uses and densities conform and are consistent with those policies. We do encourage the city to implement land use regulations that optimize employment intensity in the station. Our system concerns for the area relate to wastewater capacity. The interceptor that serves this this location is likely to experience capacity limits prior to 2040. We are aware of this limitation, and Met Council Environmental Services will address this issue in greater detail following the review and adoptions of all comprehensive plans. They do not see any immediate concerns with serving development. The plan is otherwise compatible with adjacent and affected jurisdictions and is part of border-wide planning efforts related to the Metro Gold Line. So recommended proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached review record and allow the City of Oakdale to place the Helmo Bus Rapid Transit Stationary Comprehensive Plan into effect. 2, to revise the city's forecast for population and households for the decades 2030 and 2040 as shown in Table 1 of the review record. And 3, to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record forecast land use. Madam Chair, that completes my presentation.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mike? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, is there a project that's imminent for this, that they wanted to do it now rather than do it as a part of the normal comp plan update?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Wolf, I believe there had been development interest, and that precipitated the need to do the environmental review that would be in support of the comprehensive plan amendment. I believe that is no longer the case. I just neglected to mention that we do have Emily Shidley from the City of Oakdale here, and she's available to ask some detailed questions if that was needed. But I'm not aware of the current status or how imminent development at this location would be.
Emily, because you're here, would you like to join us and tell us about this exciting project?
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. The City Council of Oakdale has been doing stationary planning for almost a year for this area, and we're really excited to finally come up with something that responds to the context of the existing context in the area. We've got business campuses in both the east and the west end. We've also got existing established neighborhoods to the north. So we wanted to make sure that we were compatible at the edges and along the north side as well, kind of a density gradient from the north to the south, higher density along the south, and also really maximizing this transit infrastructure investment opportunity with higher density close to the station. Within an eighth of a mile of the station area is where the highest density and most activity is going to be located. So the council is really excited about this. We do have development interest in that area, so we want to make sure that we're planning now for city infrastructure improvements and getting all of the land use regulations in place ready to go.
Any other questions for Mike or Emily? Thank you so much. Is there a motion to approve the proposed action on the Oakdale Helmo station area
Move
planning?
approval. Second.
First and a second, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Our next item, folks, is 2018-142. The City of Minneapolis requests to extend the term of the 4th Street Infrastructure Livable Communities Demonstration Account Grant beyond the 5-year maximum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a long title, isn't it?
Ooh,
This is a request. Normally, grant terms are 3 years with a possibility of an extension up to 5 years. Progress is shown. This is one of several grants for several projects that have been underway in this area. I can work this thing. There we go. So in 2013, $1 million Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development Grant was awarded to the 4th Street Infrastructure Project. And the project that this was to catalyze was what we've known as the Green on 4th, or the Baser site. That project struggled to get off the ground. The Baser project struggled to get off the ground. And a second developer eventually stepped in and is now, the groundbreaking for that was about 2 months ago. So that project is currently underway. The street itself has been approved, and you may be familiar with a project that we didn't help with grant funding, but it's known as the Harlem Irving project, right on the corner where the light rail bends and stops at the Prospect Park Station. That project is finishing up now, and the grant funding was for this project was placemaking, public connecting elements, utility and stormwater improvements on the Green 4th Street. Now the city could construct those improvements by the end of this year, which is the end of the 5-year term, but they requested an additional extension because they're concerned that there are several other projects that are currently underway or not yet underway that would be constructed along the same stretch of street, and they're concerned that these other projects would end up disturbing the newly constructed grant-funded activities, and they'd have to be rebuilt as a result of the construction that's going on. So the 3 other projects was the Harlem Irving project, the AN Prospect Park project that also received Livable Communities funding, and a senior building at 4th and Malcolm. So this is an overview area just to orient yourself. That sort of open area up on the upper right-hand corner is the Surly site, right? You can see the cursor there. The area that we've helped fund, the grant-funded activities were along this stretch of 4th Street along here. If you can see the cursor moving, the A8, I believe, or A6 is the Baser site, and also part of A5 is the Baser site. Green on 4th, A3, this area right here is the AN project. This large site here is the Harlem Irving project, and this area over here is the senior building that will be starting. Actually, I believe it has started, and if you can see real close there on the right-hand side, this A1 isn't going to be finished until May 2020. The AN project won't be finished until September 2019. The green on 4th would be next June. And so that's why the city is concerned that all this construction activity, I don't expect you to be able to read all of this, but this is just a slide to give you some sense of all this green stuff. And the linear strip here on 4th Street is the stuff that the grant's funding. So if you can see on this map, you can see these several projects here. Here's the Green on 4th project. This area is the Aon. And again, this is the senior project over here. So the city's concerned that all this construction activity would disrupt the grant-funded activities along 4th Street. This is just a sort of a visual representation of what something like what it's going to be looking like at the completion of the project. And so then the request is to approve an additional 2-year extension beyond the 5-year maximum and authorizes Community Development Director to execute an amendment on behalf of the council.
Are there any questions? Councilmember Dorfman,
I'll move it first.
is there a second?
Second.
We've got a first and a second.
This is really exciting, and hopefully it'll happen as quickly as possible. Lots of affordable housing units going into this area when fully developed from those projects you described. So it's great.
Folks, before we vote, I want to remind you that we received an email from Councilmember Latofsky strongly urging the extension of the grant. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It looks like most of these construction is imminent if it hasn't already begun. Are they all fully funded, or are any of them still waiting for any hoops to get through that might derail them?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Wolf, well, we do know that the Green on 4th project, or what we know as the Baser project, is fully funded. There was a groundbreaking. It is under construction right now. I'm not positive about the Aon project. They may still be assembling additional funding. The city tells me that the senior building should be starting this summer. So the presumption is that one's fully funded. We don't have any involvement in that one, and the Harlem Irving project is almost finished, so obviously that one's funded.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make sure we're not going to be coming back and doing this again.
Understood. One last question. The senior development that you refer to, is that the controversial 30-story Vermilion project that I've been reading about?
Madam Chair, I don't believe so. I haven't heard any. I'm sorry. Representatives from the city are here too. Paula Mazzacano is here. I don't believe I've heard any controversy over this one.
Okay. Well, in that case, we've got a first and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Approved. Thank you. Folks, we're on to our information item. We need more housing, the region's residential development in 2017. Matt, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, council members. I am Matt Schroeder from the Community Development Research Unit, formerly known as Regional Policy and Research. And I'm joined today by Kristen Ribaturas, whom I've acknowledged as my collaborator in basically every presentation I've given. So I'm really glad that she's able to, the stars finally aligned that we could do this together. We are talking today about the region's residential development in 2017, drawing from the lessons of our recently concluded annual building permit survey. And this generally provides an opportunity to look at how development is proceeding and how well that aligns with council goals with respect to the density of new housing, to what extent it's aligned with transit, to what extent it's balanced across the region, and as well what the overall supply how much is getting developed, and that's kind of the focus we're taking today. Hence the short title: "We Need More Housing." The context here, as we probably all can recite from the news, is that our region has some of the lowest vacancy rates that we've had since the turn of the century. There are, I think, 25% fewer single-family homes on the market now than there were at this point a year ago. 50% fewer single-family homes priced under $200,000. The rental market is quite competitive. According to our estimates, there's been a steep loss of units that are affordable to households that are below 50% of AMI. So, building in all this, we need more housing and have needed it for a while, especially homes that are affordable to low-income households. And so, with the rest of this presentation, we'll be digging into to what extent 2017 shifted that trend, that general dynamic. So we'll start by talking about the nuts and bolts of the data, the building permit survey, and how we know this. And then we've organized the presentation of findings around these three large trends that we find in the national literature on the supply of housing, which I'll cover, and then the type of housing and the location of housing, both of which Kristen will cover. And then we'll have, because it's an info item, some time for discussion at the end. So we're happy to clarify any questions about the data or numbers or interpretation of charts along the way. But we hope that there will be enough for a deep and probing discussion at the end. So our building permit survey is something that we've done annually since 1970. It's a very important, input into our population estimates, which I'll be back to talk about in, I think, 6 or 7 weeks from now. This is something that we develop in collaboration with local governments. So we survey them. They provide permitting numbers to us. So it's a pretty important collaboration. At that point, we validate with federal sources and other data sets that are available to us, clearing up any questions with communities along the way. We're pleased to report that in 2017, 96% of our region's communities responded to the survey, which I think is one of the highest it's been. The data are now available on our website, metrocouncil.org/data, both via our community profiles and data download sites, as well as a new interactive visualization in Tableau, which is also available on our website. It's an interactive map that allows people to explore the data on their own.
I won't demonstrate it, so the internet won't break it again in council chambers.
We remember that.
No, this will go better. Due to no fault of anyone here, at the previous presentation, that did not work as well as it might have. But the big point here is that we're trying to be the generalists of the region. So there's certainly many detailed reports on the single-family market and the multifamily market from places like Marquette Advisors or the Minneapolis and St. Paul area associations of realtors or many other housing industry specialists. What we're trying to do is to try to take a single comprehensive look across the region, trying to make the data as consistent across different communities as possible. Quickly, in brief, our 2017 findings largely echo our previous reports. Residential development is up relative to 2016. The majority of that has been multifamily, and Minneapolis is still the largest permitter by far, but development is happening in a relatively balanced fashion across the region, and we'll get into these later. But I did want to talk first about how we're measuring development. This is a chart of new construction permits only since 1970, for as long as we've been collecting the data. And you can see that in 2017, communities across the region permitted 15,652 units of new housing. So up 11% from 2016, and the highest it's been since 2005, which is good news again. So as our region continues to emerge from the crash. And when we look at the historical average between 1970 and 2016 of about 15,300 units a year, you can see that we're on par with that, actually slightly above it. So this is the first year since, I believe, 2005 that we've kind of gotten back up to that historical average, which is good news. There are a lot of other permit types, though, that affect housing stock. There are demolitions, there are conversions from or to commercial uses. There's remodeling that adds or subtracts units. So all these other permits also affect the housing stock as well. And to better capture the focus of our presentation, which is the housing supply in general, we're going to be focusing on the net change in housing resulting from permits issued in a given year. And this is how that works. We start with the new construction permits. These are the same numbers that we saw on the previous slide, just for 2010 through 2017. We add in some conversions. These are old factories or warehouses or other commercial buildings that have since been converted to housing. A small number of miscellaneous other additions. And then we also look at permits that lost units, mainly demolitions, several hundred of which occur in any given year, as well as a tiny number of other losses. And when we add all that up, all those 5 different types of permits together, we get the net change, which we've shown here in the green line, which is usually pretty close to the new construction, the light blue bar. But we still want to pay attention to it for a couple of reasons. First, sometimes net change is not the same as new construction permits. This happened in 2014 when the net change of about 10,000 units was about 7% lower than the total number of new construction permits. So here, taking into account the demolitions makes a difference in how much development occurred in 2014. And second, this difference can vary a lot across communities. So in places that are experiencing a lot of teardowns and rebuilds, like Edina or St. Louis Park, looking only at new construction would lead us to the conclusion that there's been some new additions to the housing stock there, when in fact they've only replaced older units that have been torn down. So this is the idea behind net change, and this will kind of be more the focus of subsequent slides.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you talk about other loss, would that be like you take a single-family home and turn it into a law office or something like you see along some of our busier thoroughfares?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Wolf, that's correct. It could be housing that's converted into commercial uses like an office. It could be a duplex that's converted to a single-family unit. In rare cases, it can be a house that was picked up off of its foundation, moved to a completely different community. Not many of those, but they do happen. So they're, again, a tiny number, but we do try to capture everything that we can.
Councilmember Dorfman.
This does not, however, take into effect boarded and vacant housing, right?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, I'm sorry, I missed the specific words.
But there was, in fact, I think there's an article in today's paper about the significant number of boarded and vacant homes that remain in our communities. This does not take that into account in any action, right?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, that's correct. Those are incorporated into our population estimates when we are looking at vacant units versus occupied units. But for the purpose of this presentation, we're looking only at all housing units, whether occupied or vacant.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Paul or Kristen? Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this slide then shows net change. Again, data aren't available before 2000, but comparable to the new production slide from a couple of slides ago, we are at 15,226 units in 2017, resulting from permits issued in 2017. So again, not quite as high as previous peaks, but still, especially looking at the average going back to 2000, considerably higher than that average. So we're up above the historical average, especially when we look at net change. The question, of course, is whether that's enough, and that's what we'll talk about now. When we think about whether our region is mirroring the national trends. So we want the questions that we ask of our data to reflect conversations that are happening outside of our organization. So we consulted reports and publications from organizations like Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies, the Brookings Institution, the National Association of Home Builders, and other sources. And we've come up with, as an organizing principle, 3 broad brush national trends. And again, I'll discuss the first of these on supply. Kristen will discuss the second and third. But the first of these is the idea that when we look at supply, there is a housing shortage across the country, which may be pushing up housing costs. So national observers note that for the recession, it was uncommon to have as few as 1 million single-family permits in a single year. And that's a mark that we still haven't hit as we come out of the recession nationwide. With multifamily permits, we've been averaging about 400,000 units a year nationally, compared with 500,000 during the 80s and about 600,000 during the 1970s. So we do continue to recover from the crash, but we're still not back, as we've seen, to those previous peaks of production. And the concern here is that as our population grows and the supply isn't growing enough to keep up with demand, that sellers and landlords have more leeway to ask more for the housing that they are selling or renting. So the concern here is that housing costs are increasing partly, at least, because the supply of new housing isn't keeping up with the demand for it. So we took a look across the country at our peer regions as identified by Greater MSP in their most recent regional indicators dashboard. We've ranked us in green and our 11 peers according to housing unit change between 2010 and 2017 as estimated by the Census Bureau. And you can see here that we are 8th out of these 12 peer metros in terms of percent change in housing units as estimated by the Census Bureau. If there's a silver lining here, you can see that we are not San Francisco. We are beating them by about 0.6 of a percentage point. Not much of a silver lining, admittedly, but still. But as I mentioned, the concern here is how housing unit growth is or is not keeping up with population growth. And that's charted here in the blue line. So you can see here that across 10 of these 12 total metros, housing unit production is lagging behind the demand for these, the population that lives in these housing units. And we can get a better sense of by how much it's lagging if we divide these two numbers. So we can get a sense of how far behind is housing production relative to the population growth rate. And when we do that, we can see that we are about 43% behind where we need to be in order to keep up with population growth. And that's the third biggest gap, I guess you'd say, among these metros. And two of them, as I mentioned, Pittsburgh and Chicago, housing unit growth is actually exceeding population growth. But behind San Francisco and Atlanta, we have the third highest gap. So cause for concern. And I want to emphasize, too, that in raw numbers, in terms of raw numbers, other metros may, like Dallas and Seattle probably, may have more of a gap to keep up. But in terms of percentages, in terms of by how much we would need to raise our level of production, we have the third highest. We will, to get a better sense of specifically how far behind we are and how many new units we'll need to produce in order to make up that gap. We've drawn from our preliminary housing stock and household estimates that we released a few weeks ago. These are still under review by communities, so these are not final numbers, but just as a rough guide. For a sense of scale, here are some numbers. We estimate about 63,700 units since the 2010 census, which has resulted in our current vacancy rate of about 4%. In order to get back to a healthy vacancy rate of 5%, which most market analysts consider a rough balance between landlords and sellers on the one hand, and home buyers and renters on the other hand, according to our estimates, we would need an additional 13,400 units to get back to that healthy vacancy rate. And if we look at specifically where that where these units will be needed. I'll emphasize that Kristen will talk in a little bit about the location of where development has happened, but just in this hypothetical exercise, looking at these 13,400 units, as well as vacancy rates across the region, we find that the majority of them need to go to suburban and suburban edge communities using the Thrive MSP 2040 community designations, with some others needing to go to urban and emerging suburban edge communities. So what this means is that the vacancy rates in rural communities and urban center communities, taken as a whole, are slightly above 5%. So it's in these community designations where new housing, again, in this hypothetical exercise, is needed to create a balanced vacancy rate.
Yeah, so when you're talking about the 4% vacancy rate for the region, we're talking multifamily rental, home ownership, it's everything?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, that's correct. This cuts across all different housing types.
Because I know if we look at rental vacancy rates, for example, in the urban core, they're really low right now. I mean, well below that, half of that 4%, right?
That's correct, Councilmember Dorfman. And if it's of interest in our presentation on the population estimates in 6 weeks or so from now, we can present estimates of vacancy rates by type.
Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick check-in. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder in your presentation, but when I'm looking at the percentages in the right-hand column or margin, are you going to talk about those percentages in this presentation? How those are derived?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Chavez, if you mean the calculation of those specific percentages, we had not planned to talk about that. We certainly could, or we could follow up by email.
Madam Chair, if I can follow up, please.
Please.
Then here's a question for consideration. As far as how would I know that 42% suburban, 37% suburban edge? So I'm just trying to understand the methodology for that, because being a social engineer that I am at council, I would want to say, well, how are those services going to be delivered there? You can tell me all you want as far as placing X number of houses belonging in those areas. But if there's no services, how does that really meet everybody's needs? So that's the rhetorical question. Thanks.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Chavez, thank you for the question. These were calculated essentially by taking the current preliminary estimate for the number of households in each community designation, and dividing it by the occupancy rate of 95%. So basically getting back to the 5% vacancy rate. So these are additional units that would be needed to house households that we are estimating already exist in these communities, but that are now occupying vacant homes that would otherwise be vacant at a rate to draw the vacancy rate below 5%.
Thank you.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So clearly supply is an issue across our peer regions as well. But as you were looking at some of this data, were you seeing anything or different programs or policies that are being put in place in some of the regions that may be doing better? And especially when it comes to maybe the suburban and suburban edge, or is that as to follow up on Councilmember Chavez, is that like another area that we should be looking into and kind of peeling that apart a little bit?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Barber, in our examination of this, given the available time and data, we did not go so far as to look at what specific policies or practices other regions may or may not be using that contribute to these. I mean, given the complexity of housing markets and their intersection with a variety of factors, it would be a large discussion. Although we would be interested to hear what questions you have about that and what ideas you have in the discussion at the end, so that we can take that back and try to do our best to at least come up with tentative answers.
Thank you.
Councilmember Elkins, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a variation on that. So I think what I heard is that basically these distributions among municipal our classifications, you're comparing our system statement population projections against the supply.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Elkins, I apologize for the lack of clarity. These are based on our population estimates, which are our best guess at what currently exists or did exist in 2017. The forecasts look ahead in time to coming decades. So this does not have anything to do with what the council has forecast will be the case in coming years. This is looking only at essentially, I guess you could consider this a measure of both where vacancy rates are lowest.
Okay. Okay.
Matt, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To put this, to put this number into perspective, this 13,400 number that we would need across the region to create a healthier vacancy rate of 5%. I've tacked that onto the previous graph of net change, and so in that green addition above the 2017 orange bar, you can see how that 13,400 units adds to the new production. So the point here is that we would need to almost double last year's production in order to meet the existing demand for new housing in a way that would, again, create that 5% vacancy rate, which is considerably higher than any year going back to 2000, and I believe as well would be about on par with the peak development years of the early 1970s. So again, this is only a hypothetical exercise. This, I don't know that anyone is claiming that this would be feasible to do this, to make up this gap in a single year. But again, just for the sake of scale, this is what it would look like.
And Madam Chair, and then if you added in the increase in development costs since, back then too, makes it even more challenging.
Yes. So for that first trend, that national trend of a housing shortage, that does seem to apply for our region, which is why we've put a green check mark in that second column there, that rightmost column. There is a housing shortage, potentially in percentage terms at least, worse than many of our peers like Denver, Seattle, and Portland. And this may be playing a role in driving up our housing costs, although I will note that we will be providing more data on the affordability of recent development later this year, and Kristen will talk about that later as well. But for now, I am very happy to turn it over to Kristen.
Thanks, Matt. The second trend that we identified by looking at the national reports and literature was that multifamily development has peaked in recent years. After a considerable period of time of unprecedented growth following the Great Recession. Dodge Data and Analytics reported that 7 of the 10 largest housing markets, so not the peer metros Matt just showed you, but large housing markets like New York, Miami, Washington, D.C., showed a reduction in multifamily construction in 2017 compared to 2016. Also, the value of multifamily construction in aggregate fell 12% between 2016 and 2017. The U.S. as a whole added about 4,000 fewer multifamily units in 2017 than in 2016, a decline of only 1.2%, but certainly not the trend that we've seen. And single-family home construction over the same time period increased over 9%. So this is a reflection of changing market conditions. Between 2010 and 2015, the U.S. added about 1 million new renter households per year, which was a combination of new household formation as well as those displaced from home ownership during the housing crisis. That slowed down to about 625,000 new renter households in 2016, and the Joint Center for Housing Studies projections estimate that we'll add about 500,000 renter households per year until 2025. So this surge in growth of rental households has subsided, but it's certainly elevated compared to historic averages in previous decades. Second, the financial sector has enacted stricter underwriting practices for multifamily projects, according to a recent Federal Reserve study of loan officers. In part, this reflects concerns about rising property prices and in some markets, an excess of luxury or Class A units. So this contraction in multifamily new construction is primarily taking place in metros like Los Angeles, Dallas, Washington, D.C., New York, and those are large shares of the U.S. housing market overall and thus have a large effect on the overall numbers. Most market analysts are noting in those reports, however, that the medium-term outlook is more of a plateau and maybe with some decline rather than a steep decline. Despite what those trends in renter households may say. In part, that's because the demand for rental housing is going to remain strong due to the lack of supply that Matt just described, as well as a broader base of households that are opting to rent. Smaller metro areas like ours were relative latecomers to the rental market boom, and so we may be trailing some of these larger markets. However, our demographic shifts and strong economy have kept and are expected to keep the demand for rental housing strong in the region. When we draw comparisons between our current housing production, so between 2010 and 2017, shown on the right, and the regional forecast to 2040 on the left, there is great alignment with what we think will happen and what is actually taking place. The most new housing units in the region are expected to be attached housing, predominantly multifamily. Even if the overall multifamily market dynamics are changing, especially in coastal metros or larger areas, the region is pretty much on track. Digging a little bit further into the housing types produced in the region. Let's see. Multifamily, as we've said several times now, and I'm sure we'll say several times before the presentation concludes, remains the predominant housing type produced in the region. There was a pre-recession high of about 8,600 multifamily units in 2004 that you can see there. We bottomed out at just below 2,000 units in 2009. And with the 27 data, we have fully rebounded with just over 9,000 units added. Nearly all of these added units came from new construction. We average about 93% new construction since 2010 in terms of multifamily production and where it comes from. The local market reports describe strong fundamentals in the region's multifamily market. We're adding jobs, a broader base of households, millennials as well as empty nesters are opting to rent. Population growth and preferences are keeping rental demand strong, as well as to some extent the lack of starter homes that Matt mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Other attached housing production has been relatively low. Let's see, townhomes. Townhome production in 2004 was 5 times greater than it was in 2017, though we do see small, steady gains in recent years. Duplexes, triplexes, and quads have actually shown net losses annually since 2007. We're losing about 120 per year on average. And you can barely see that line there, but it shows up. And lastly, the region added just over 5,200 single-family homes in 2017, marking the 3rd consecutive year of increased production. The most recent Twin Cities home builder survey conducted by the University of St. Thomas shows an optimism among home builders with industry confidence in new starts, sale prices, and the availability of well-finished lots. They are less positive about land prices, material costs, and possible mortgage rate increases. Overall, the region has added over 85,000 units since 2010. And as the previous slide showed, most of these additions come from our strong multifamily market, 58% in the total. As conversations about housing supply have heightened and sort of taken over a lot of media coverage, especially here and nationally, so have additional conversations about the missing middle housing. I just want to get everything up on the slide because there's a few components here. Missing middle housing has the opportunity to kind of address both pressures, the housing supply and shortage issues that Matt described, as well as they're relatively more affordable options to low and moderate income households. As the figures on the slide show, we've not seen much recent production in these housing types. Townhomes are still at low levels, as I just said. We're still losing duplex, triplex, and quads. The cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul have enacted new ordinances regarding accessory dwelling units, although the uptake, at least reflected in our data so far, has been relatively slow and small. With comprehensive plans underway across the region, policies that encourage small-scale rental development through these missing middle housing types may show up in subsequent years of data and is something we'll continue to look at. As Matt said, we don't have a number or share of how much of 2017's added housing was affordable to low and moderate income households. That's derived from our Affordable Housing Production Survey, which will take place later this year. However, there are some local housing reports that put the number of affordable units under 1,000 units of the 15,000 added. So a decrease from 2016, if true. We will share that information when we produce that data later in the year. So the data of the region tells us that this general trend of cooling multifamily development is not occurring in the Twin Cities region, or at least not yet. The third and last national trend we're talking about today concerns location. The U.S. remains by and large a suburban nation in many ways. Suburbs account for 79% of the population and 32% of overall land area. However, what constitutes a suburb varies, and there's no federal definition. Thus, different studies we looked at used different classifications based on county or zip code or even census tracts to identify what suburban was. So we don't have an apples to apples comparison here. However, the general trends were that suburban areas were leading in overall net growth in population and net growth in housing units since 2000. So we wanted to see how that compares to development patterns we see in the region. Again, using the Thrive community designations, we grouped several of them together to form 4 main areas here: urban centers, urban and suburban areas, and edge communities in the rural service area. The net housing change in urban centers was strong in the post-recession years. We added over 24,000 units in urban centers since 2010, representing 27% of the total production in this time period. Urban and suburban areas had a similar share of growth, and it was especially high in 2017, as the last bar shows. The region's suburban edge and emerging suburban edge communities made up most of the remainder at 41%, or nearly 34,000 units. Drilling down a little bit deeper into the data, we have a map of the 2017 net change in housing units on the screen. This includes cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Golden Valley that made the top 10, as did Lakeville, Apple Valley, and Eagan. And so to see the spatial display of the most recent building permit data. Drilling down even further into the housing types developed by these top 10 cities. Minneapolis far outpaced other cities with nearly 2,300 units added in 2017, predominantly multifamily housing. The next highest totals come from other suburban and edge communities. Lakeville added 838 units, split between multifamily and single-family homes, as did Apple Valley added 784 units, and Golden Valley 778. And again, we see a mix of housing types in different areas. St. Paul and Edina both lost small numbers of other attached housing, but made up for it in strong multifamily production last year. We're going to go even further into the data. This map shows the net housing change at block group level, and the boundaries you see on top there are the Minneapolis and St. Paul neighborhoods. The downtowns of both Minneapolis and St. Paul are especially hot submarkets for multifamily housing. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone here. In Minneapolis, 23 properties produced nearly all of their 2017 total. So that's averaging about 100 per property. Areas near the University of Minnesota were also a high-performing submarket. Again, there are so many reports that go into such great detail about this. We didn't feel the need to do a full market analysis here, but we also have the transitways laid over this so that you can understand the proximity to those transitways. Lastly, we are presenting the 2017 development density by housing type. We have single-family detached versus all attached units, including multifamily. Where new multifamily, and I should also point out in this slide that this is only reflecting a new construction, not all net housing change. Where multifamily was built in 2017, the density is above the regional average, especially in the core cities and adjacent municipalities. New single-family construction in 2017 was also built at higher than the regional average. Because of the relatively balanced development taking place across the region, we did not consider the region to be well aligned with the national trend concerning location. So, key takeaways from all of that information. We need more housing. Residential construction is still rising, but it's not enough to keep up with the growing population. Multifamily construction continues to outpace single-family detached construction, consistent with our long-term expectations. And strong growth in both the developed core and developing edges of the region continued in 2017. And with that, we would be happy to take any additional questions or comments.
Any questions for Kristen or Matt? Councilmember Dorfman.
So I have a question, which may not be for you. When we do the follow-up surveys to take a closer look at the need for affordable housing, I mean, when we look at all of this data together that we then will have, to what extent and how does that impact how we set goals for each community's share of affordable housing? I mean, I assume we're gonna, Lisa. I mean, I assume at some point we actually take a look at this data and at goals we're setting and make sure that they're aligned, right?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, I will tell you what I know and happily defer to other people who might want to add more. The process of allocating the region's affordable housing need to different communities takes place once every 10 years. In this past cycle, each community's share of its existing housing that was affordable was a factor in that, so that communities with less of their existing housing that was affordable got a relatively higher proportional share of the region's need that was designated for that needed, here I should probably defer. But I believe that communities needed to guide a certain amount of land to house these low-income households with this need, and that is what. So that communities with less affordable housing needed to guide relatively more land at densities sufficient to promote the development of affordable housing. For the next cycle, roughly, I would guess 4 to 5 years from now, that will be, I assume, a decision that is influenced by the next council. But at this point, I will happily defer to.
But I think that's my question. I get that timing in that cycle, but if, in doing studies like this, if we receive new information that may suggest that we need to recalibrate those numbers, is there any opportunity to do that in a timely basis, or do we have to just say, well, it's not aligned, but we don't set these new goals for each community for another 5 years?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, that's a very good question, and there's a lot can change in a couple of years, even as we experienced in the last planning cycle, where we're booming and then bust really quickly. So there's kind of a reason we take a longer time frame for that. We are cautious in the middle of a comprehensive planning cycle to introduce new policy requirements, but certainly what we are hearing from communities, especially in these areas, and as I've talked with you folks about in the past, is with amendments that are coming forward, they're really trying to stay on top of that housing demand. We see a lot of that in our suburban communities with amendments over the last 6 or 7 years that have been primarily for multifamily housing, really trying to get on top of that. And that has been a regular part of conversations that I know my staff have had with local planning staff as they have been updating their plans. So while we have a forecasted growth number, we use don't want to get too down into the weeds here, but in the guided land use, as you may recall, we require that communities use a minimum and maximum density range for each of their guided land uses. We use that midpoint of the range for capacity, but that upper end of the range gives a lot more flexibility for a community to accommodate more than they might otherwise need to for their forecasted growth or for their affordable housing need. And we want to encourage that using that density range and building in that flexibility so that we can have that ability to account for housing shortages over long periods of time, but also to respond to the market when there are changes as well without needing to amend your plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one thing I think I'd really like to see in the kind of the follow-up surveys, and I'm really curious to see what happens, is there were some legislative changes in 2017 regarding townhomes. And I know that I'm seeing out in, just as you're driving around, you're seeing more building of townhomes now. And I'd be really curious to see how that trend changes, because I expect it to likely change significantly and maybe very quickly. So I'd be really curious to see what those numbers will look like.
Councilmember Elkins.
Just to follow up on that, Madam Chair, I went to the last Sensible Land Use Coalition meeting, which had a panel of developers and housing developers and staff, and the developers on the panel were also saying that they were seeing an unsatisfied demand for townhomes.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
So does that mean, if you start to fill in the missing middle, does it mean, do we think that means that there'll be more affordable multifamily for families that are living at 30% or below? Is that sort of a natural?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Dorfman, here again, I can offer probably only a little slice of what you are probably asking about.
Probably more than I know, so.
Well, we'll see. The thinking is that because these kind of smaller, kind of low-scale attached housing, the thinking here is that because the cost per unit is lower to build them, since they're able to put more units on a certain amount of land and share materials, that the cost per unit is lower, and these will be more affordable. What I've seen in the various kinds of housing continuums that are being developed is that typically people conceive of the 30% of AMI and below level as needing some pretty deep public subsidy to make sustainable. So off the top of my head, I can't remember whether those housing continuum documents put the missing middle into them, but I would hazard a guess that they would be probably more in the 50 to 80% range. But if anyone else has more information, please feel free to supplement.
Kristen and Matt, I went to a housing summit in Minneapolis. It was about the West Metro, and the sense that there's a housing crisis was palpable, especially among younger folks trying to get into the housing market. And what we were told is that the median home price in Minneapolis is $266,000. And most people, even those at a living wage, aren't able to get into the market if they can even find a place to live. And there was a lot of support for Mayor Fry's initiative to change the zoning so that every neighborhood, even those that are affluent, can have quads. There was a lot of public support for that as a way of making all neighborhoods have an affordable choice. I'm just curious if there is a funding source to make quads affordable to build and to live in. Do you know?
I don't. Madam Chair, I'm not aware of the funding sources. Some of the discussion that I've seen in sort of folks that follow land use and transportation issues in the region, they describe owner-occupied places, and that owner deciding I can do a land, I can become a landlord and building, that extra unit on top of their garage or some other such thing, but to my knowledge, there's not a specific funding source, although as policy evolves and those policies are strengthened to encourage that kind of small-scale rental development, perhaps funding sources will emerge to support that.
Thank you. Any other questions, folks? Thank you so much for your report. You've put the numbers to, I think, what all of us are feeling is a housing crisis.
Thank you.
So, folks, in terms of consent and non-consent, I'm thinking the first agenda item with the public hearing would be consent. The second one, the City of Cottage Grove comp plan amendment, that is inconsistent in terms of natural resources. Do folks think that should be consent or non-consent?
Ask Harry.
Let's put that on the non-consent.
Madam Chair, I didn't get to weigh in on that. I would actually advocate for it being on consent, as there is no funding source to buy up natural areas. The council is not going to give money to the city to buy that property, and so there is no leverage there or anything. I guess I don't see the point of putting it on the regular agenda.
So do folks agree we should put that on consent?
I think so. It's not a grounds for denying it.
Okay. Let's put Cottage Grove on consent. I'd suggest that we put Oakdale, the BRTOD, on non-consent, just because it's such a great example that we should share with others. And the Minneapolis request is something that community development decided today. We don't have to put that to the full council. Okay, good deal. Thank you all. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.